hate to say it, but we may have been wrong about hating Raw being 3 hours. We say this after the first 2-hour Raw in 4,459 days.
You think you know all the wrestling stories? There's more you haven't heard yet. Join us on Backstage Pass.
On October 7th, WWE started airing 2-hour episodes of Raw again, and boy oh boy was it not good. Before we get into why, let's go back 12 years ago. On Raw 1000 on July 23rd, 2012, Monday Night Raw permanently changed to 3 hours. The reception wasn't exactly a good one. 2012 wasn't even a bad year for WWE. It was actually quite good by the 2010 standards. Not as good as 2011, not as good as 2016, but most certainly better than the years that followed, like 2017 to 2018. But the fact was that WWE fans felt overwhelmed with the idea of having to tune into Raw being an extra hour. There were a few people, and they were the clear minority, who were prophetic enough to realize that with the increasing size of the WWE roster, 3 hours made a lot of sense for WWE's flagship show. From WWE's point of view, the 3-hour slot meant extra revenue. This was still before the boom in broadcast revenue they experienced in the late 2010s, but having an extra hour of programming meant that any broadcast network that aired Raw had an extra hour of advertisements. This gave WWE massive leverage when it came to negotiating contracts, and it really culminated recently with the gargantuan 10-year, $5 billion Netflix deal. The issue that fans had was the fact that this wasn't a seasonal TV show. Monday Night Raw happened every single week without a break and was constantly on the road, so wrestling fatigue was quite easy. But as we know, the fatigue came from more of lack of quality than anything else. WWE Raw also turned into an increasingly valuable asset for broadcast networks like the NBC Universal Media Group, the owners of the USA Network that aired Raw. With cord cutting happening at a rapid rate and the rise of streaming, networks were desperate to have programs that had good ratings. Don't let the record low ratings articles about Raw over the years fool you. Even if Raw had a little over 1 million viewers, that was still significantly more than almost anything the USA Network had going on. The fact that wrestling and WWE in particular had such a hardcore fan base who would consistently tune in even after complaining all the time meant that it was a valuable property. And it is true that there were years like 2015 where there wasn't much to look forward to at all, with guys like Seth Rollins being the only ones to carry the show on his back. But once the brand split was reintroduced, things began to change, but not right away. The brand split in particular served to benefit SmackDown, but Raw was a huge beneficiary because there was now a defined roster with growing competition amongst talent. Now here's where we feel the 3-hour format for Raw really works out well. Think of a show like Game of Thrones. If you haven't seen Game of Thrones, we'll give you a small rundown on how exactly it would compare to wrestling. Although storylines of different characters were interconnected, many were in different locations doing different things, so there wasn't really filler for any episode until the last season because there were just that many interesting characters to follow, and that was like 1 hour and 8 to 10 episodes a season. For Raw, it's 52 episodes a year with a larger cast ensemble. And although there aren't any different locations like Game of Thrones, there's an easy opportunity to have filler by focusing on multiple superstars and multiple storylines. Not only that, but it also gives time for advertisements to be spaced out while we're also occasionally treated to an ad-free first hour. We're not going to claim that Raw hasn't had filler because even in the new regime, there have been episodes with filler. But at this point, most fans who have been watching Raw for a while have gotten accustomed to watching 3 hours. Under Triple H, the time has been utilized significantly better, with more superstars getting TV time and an opportunity to shine. When the 2-hour format returned on October 7th, 2024, it was a clear sign that WWE was in an era where the 3-hour format was needed. The 3-hour format would have been horrible in the Attitude Era, and it isn't exactly a bold take to say that it would have flopped in the Ruthless Aggression Era. It's a product of its time, and in a way, it's quite unique that any type of broadcast entertainment can consistently have a 3-hour show that works. It comes down to a few different factors. As we mentioned before, the roster size and quality of talent are on a much higher level than years before, even if there aren't as much megastars. If you think about top stars on the current roster, you have Gunther, Liv Morgan, Rhea Ripley, Damian Priest, CM Punk, Seth Rollins, Drew McIntyre, Io Sky, and many more. We bet you could think of multiple stars on both the men's and women's side who could take their spot if they weren't around. Another major reason is just the way we consume content has changed, and wrestling is quite similar while also having major differences. The fact that WWE fans are quite a dedicated bunch doesn't get talked about enough, and if they aren't happy with how certain superstars are being treated, they will let their voices be heard. But when you look at the October 7th episode of Raw, it's quite clear that it was a crammed-in mess. We essentially saw 3 hours worth of advertisements in 2 hours. We're glad that Sami Zayn didn't win the World Heavyweight Championship from Gunther. Can you imagine if Sami Zayn's first ever WWE World Championship win came on an episode of Raw where half the match was filled with advertisements and 1 minute of celebration? And then there was the elephant in the room, the women being the first ones to face the cuts. Women in WWE have stated before that time constraints are quite common, forcing segments and even matches to be cut down or cut out altogether. Rhea Ripley, the biggest women's wrestler in the world in 2024, got a whopping 1 minute of promo time in a pre-recorded segment, while Liv Morgan, the top woman in WWE right now, appeared and disappeared within 1 minute. And then there was the 10-woman tag team match featuring stars like Lyra Valkyria, Natalya, the Pure Fusion Collective, and others. It felt like they were all stuffed into one match to give fans a token women's match, but what's the point when it means nothing? It's hard to deny the women of the past who have said that they are usually the first ones to get cut when the numerical evidence quite clearly suggests that they were the most negatively affected by it. When Triple H was asked about the 2-hour Raw format they'd have to go through for the rest of 2024, he gave an interesting insight. He said that it's a wild spot to be in and that the difference between 2 and 3 hours is night and day. He even said he has to approach the show from a whole different perspective and said that he felt less is more and that it would be a good thing. But was it a good thing? We're going to give Triple H and WWE the benefit of the doubt and argue that perhaps this is a trial and error period where they have to figure out how to go about the pacing of the show. But if the new norm until the Netflix deal kicks off is to have 3 hours worth of ads in 2 hours, less is not going to be more at all. Apart from Sheamus versus Pete Dunne and Jey Uso versus Xavier Woods, the show was one of the weakest we've seen in the last 2 years. Again, we're going to give WWE the benefit of the doubt here because even Triple H doesn't have any experience whatsoever running a 2-hour episode of Raw. Sure, he runs 2-hour SmackDown episodes every week, but there's quite a difference in the overall roster size. We have to say that we are looking forward to WWE moving to Netflix because not only can they have more flexibility on runtime, but we're unlikely to see the abrupt endings that have plagued Raw quite a bit this year. What do you think? Do you want to see the 3-hour format return, or are you comfortable and prefer 2 hours of Raw every Monday night? Let us know what you think in the comments below.